take the intro?
It's gonna be dangerous. And I'm like, no, it's not.
Me too. Oh, it's okay. It's all cool.
Do you get any reflection on this?
Is that good?
I think after this will be okay.
Like, were you born in Turkey? Where?
Canada.
July 15th will be remembered here in Turkey as a night of defiance. That night, a section of the Turkish military staged a coup attempt in defiance of the democratically elected government. But the coup was met by the people of Turkey, who were just as defiant in their refusal to back down. There are countless personal stories from that night, and here at TRT World, we have several of our own. Joining me now is one of our senior news presenters, Andrea Sankey. We also have Soraya Salam, the executive producer for Newsmakers. Arabella Monroe is one of our output producers. Mohsen Mogul is an executive producer with the planning department. And Yasin Ekin is a TRT World field producer. And I'm your host, Stavroula Logothetis. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming to the table.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
So, we all experienced that night almost a year ago. Where were you? And what happened for you? Andrea?
I was in the middle of presenting a live broadcast in which we were really focusing on the attack, the terrorist attack in Nice. So that's where our minds were at. And suddenly I had a producer in my ear saying, Andrea, in the middle of a report, please sign off. So I thought, okay, guys, you don't know what you're doing. You can't just sign off in the middle of a live broadcast or tell me why. Tell me what I have to say. And they wouldn't tell me. And the confused producer just said, I don't know. They're just saying that we have to go. So I thought, okay, again, this is probably some silly technical thing that they don't know how to manage properly. We're all kind of new at this. We're just launching the channel. And then suddenly a very panicked floor manager shouted. He said, Andrea, get up. The soldiers are outside. And then, because we had been focusing that live broadcast on the Nice attack, it immediately, my mind defaulted to, oh boy, there's been a terrorist threat, and they're evacuating us. So I got out. People were calm, though. We knew something was wrong, but it was being managed very calmly, I must say, aside from a few slightly panicked voices. And I went out to my desk, I picked up my things. Some people didn't bother picking up their stuff, they just went straight out. I went and got my thing. We all very calmly went out, and there's video footage of this. We each put our passes on the security barriers and we walked through the glass.
Single file.
Yes, yeah. Single file, very, very, very civilized. And we get out to the parking lot, and there we see about 15 or so very young soldiers, all armed. They had their guns strapped across their fronts. And remember as well, we have a military installation on this property just down from us, from this office. So we were used to seeing guys in uniform, military, soldiers, walking around, kind of patrolling the area. So again, we're thinking they're there to protect us. There must be some kind of threat. So we got into my friend's car, my colleague's car. 4 of us were in there. We realized 2 of them couldn't get home because we were told the bridges were closed. Now that was the first weird sign, you guys remember. A lot of people had been getting pictures on Twitter that this bridge was shut down. There were tanks on the bridge. Still no one knew why. And we were all thinking this is just a terrorist threat. We left, and it wasn't until we were halfway home, and it was funny because my younger colleague had suggested to the driver, do you think this is a military coup? And she said like a mom, oh, you silly girl, that doesn't happen anymore, And within about 3 minutes, we heard on the radio that the military had made an announcement.
Wow.
Yeah. And you?
Well, taking it from there, I mean, my first reaction is to switch on the television and see what's coming on the telly, and I'm switching on to TRT World. And there's a freeze frame. That's probably when Andrea went off air, and the channel went off air. So there's a freeze frame. I don't see anything there. And then it suddenly blacks out. So all I can see is the TRT World logo and the ticker running. And then a couple of seconds into this, the ticker stopped running. The scroll at the bottom of the screen stopped running. And it was all black.
What did you feel in that moment?
Something is certainly wrong.
Going back to what Andrea said, it just puts everything in motion. we knew we started receiving news, you know.
First of all, where were you that night?
I was on the bridge. I spent most of my time on the bridge.
Now, you were on the bridge before this happened, or you went to the bridge after it happened?
It
Like,
took
where
me-
were you when you...
I was at home.
You were at home?
I was at home. I got off work, went home, and I was laying in my bed. It was a really good time. It was a good day. Best evening I've had until I started receiving these tweets. And I'm investigating these, and I got a phone call. My friend was on the bridge. He was coming, he was at university going back home, and he calls me because like a lot of my friends call me when it's news related. So they call me and they say, "Hey, Yasin, do you know what's going on the bridge?" I'm like, "No, what is going on the bridge?" And he says, like, "It's packed. Traffic it's stopped. No, but nothing is moving.
Yeah.
But the other lane is like totally empty. And there's soldiers on the bridge." I'm like, "Soldiers on the bridge." I'm like, "I'll call you back." Close the phone. Start going through Twitter, different social media applications, and then start coming across a few things. One, the military seized a police precinct just right by the bridge, and then we got news of the rogue jet.
Yeah.
And then we're like, okay, so someone stole a jet. Soldiers on the bridge. I'm like, there's a terrorist threat. Later did we find out that the threat was actually on the bridge, and we didn't know how to react to that. In fact, it was when the president came out and he said, "All right, these guys are trying to undermine our government. So just go out and protect your country, protect the democracy you believe in." And then that's when everyone started coming out.
Yeah.
And what was really, really interesting was just after the president said that, from all around Istanbul, you could hear these calls to prayer, these special prayers that are being called through the minarets. There was no fear. In fact, there was a very weird sensation, this fearlessness, this empowerment.
I love that.
Yeah, I like what he just said. There was no fear.
Yeah.
And for me, that encapsulates the night.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, leading up to before I went outside and we saw everyone on FaceTime, when I heard the news, there was a lot of fear because I was afraid for my colleagues. I get a Facebook message from a friend in the States. "I heard there's a coup underway in Turkey. Are you okay?" I'm like, what? What is she talking about? How do you know this? So I go on Twitter and I see the tweets coming in. I start texting some friends trying to figure out what happened. And sure enough, I hear that our colleagues have been evacuated. And there were coup soldiers that stormed the building. So there was a period of time where we had no idea what was happening.
Yeah.
And I'm so happy to hear that it wasn't such a traumatic experience for you, because at that time I felt like, especially for the Turks in the office, I was like, okay, maybe the expats, they'll let them go. But the Turks, I was really scared for their lives. I was like, what is going on? And then when I turned on TRT and the screen went to black, I mean, that was really, that was a really scary moment for me.
Being there, though, and watching our Turkish colleagues, though, that was the most mind-blowing thing. Remember, we had a director there who literally walked up to the only leader of the movement that was there, that was screaming at us, and said, "You can't talk to us like that. My dad works for the police force for 30 years.
This is the thing. I mean,
But, oh my gosh, there was nobody was even nervous.
Yeah.
And then later we actually saw most of our Turkish colleagues come back to our office when the tanks were at our office in the military vehicles,
Yeah.
remember?
Very early in the
Live fire. The soldiers
Yeah.
started firing live rounds, and there were about 100 of our people out there.
Outside.
All they did was duck. As soon as the
Yeah.
live rounds stopped, they stood back up and started chanting, "Soldiers out, soldiers out, soldiers out," as if this were nothing. And I thought it takes a special kind of person to have that lack of fear when it comes to standing for something that they genuinely know is the right thing.
Yeah.
But
You
I
were
think
there.
when the soldiers were at the building, they were, as you said, very respectful to us. But the person who drove, because I was also there.
Where were you? You were here at TRT?
I was here, but unlike Andrea, I was in the newsroom. And we had 2 Pakistani colleagues in that night. And they turned around and they said, "This is a coup."
Really?
Yeah.
They knew. Yeah.
They
I remember
knew.
they told me
They
that
knew.
later. They're like, "Oh yeah,
They said,
we're used to this."
but it didn't feel real
Yeah.
then, because we were just seeing these reports, you know, it didn't feel real. So we were kind of joking, you know, "It's been nice working with you."
Yeah.
And then someone comes over and she says, "The military are here and we have to leave the building." And then suddenly it wasn't
So funny.
funny
anymore.
anymore.
Yeah.
And then an hour later, everyone had gone. and the
I
streets
think
were empty.
that particular hour was very critical in that I think until then I at least had thought that, okay, this is a coup and it's going to be successful, or I mean, at least the military is going to take control. But that particular call, that particular statement changed it all. That was a very critical moment in that whole night.
What statement?
When you saw the president coming on, which is quite unusual for a president to come on telly
FaceTime.
on,
On
a,
FaceTime,
on
yeah.
a video app. So, but that is what changed it all, and you could physically see. I mean, this was a very tangible transition that you were experiencing. You can hear people out on the streets, running down the stairs. In my neighborhood, which is very, I mean, I've never seen any political activity in my neighborhood. People are very quiet. They keep to themselves. Some neighbors don't even know others. I didn't know lots of my neighbors until that night, to be honest, because everyone keeps to themselves.
Hello,
but
neighbor.
I suddenly see all these people, and then I realized it was not just the followers of the ruling party, it was everyone across the political lines, across the political divide, no matter what party they were following, no matter what leaders were their favorites or not, everyone was on the streets. And that is what I could see unfold the very next morning, because that's when I could actually step out of my house. I live barely three minutes from work. And when before that, tried to go out, I did see people in civvies lining up the main street, so I really felt threatened and didn't go further. But in the morning hours, when I could actually see people confronting these soldiers who were holding our gates closed, the office compound, and I'm watching this from across the street, these waves of civilians coming, confronting these soldiers at the gates, then going back, and then armored vehicles coming in, police coming in and confronting them again. And one of the cops actually jumped the gate and went inside. And because I don't understand the language, I think this is going to be intense. This is going to be really bad now. And that's when, as you mentioned, live fire was being they fired a couple of bullets in the air as well to basically disperse the swelling crowds outside. That is when actually I could see, as I said earlier, people's power at display.
I want to ask you now, the initial shock is over as civilians and your journalist side kicks in. What happened? What did you do? How many of you went out on the street after? I know you went out on the street.
Yeah, I
So
went out on the
walk me
street.
through that.
Yeah.
When did that happen? When did you decide that, you know what, enough of this, journalist kicks in?
Yeah, it was like a knee-jerk reaction. So Erdogan comes on FaceTime, calls on the Turkish people to come out on the streets, show their support for democracy against this coup attempt. And my brother-in-law, who's Turkish, as I mentioned, he says, "I'm going out." And I think there were some neighbors upstairs who said they're going to go out. I said, "Well, if you're going out, I'm coming with you, and I'm bringing my phone, and I'm going to live stream it." We saw men, women, children just pouring out of their houses, organizing very quickly. And we just started to follow the crowd wherever it was going to go. So we got out there and we started making our way towards Vatan Street. Now, this is a very iconic street in Istanbul. It is where the mausoleum is of a former Prime Minister, Adnan Menderes, who was actually hanged after a military coup in 1960. Once we got towards Vatan Street and we came across the military tank, actually, there were people on top and they were celebrating.
Wow.
Music was blaring, people were celebrating, but the people didn't go home after that. They were like, all right, so we've secured this area. Let's make our way to the airport now.
Really?
Yes. And there were bus drivers, actually, that were giving free services. Come on, pile onto the bus, let's go to the airport. So they were seeking a confrontation and trying to see when the next area they can go to confront the military. And another thing was blaring out on the loudspeaker. It's known as the Sela in Turkish, but it's basically, literally, it's praises being sent upon the Prophet Muhammad, but its usage is usually in it's preceding big announcements. So
specifically Friday prayers and funeral services.
And funeral services, or even historically in times of war, right? It's being chanted out.
Times of war, exactly.
Yeah. So the energy was just, you know, let's go out and not take this military coup attempt lying down. And all the while, I'm live streaming this on Facebook. I'm getting comments from friends around the world, especially in the States, saying, you know, telling everyone share her post because a lot of the coverage is not correct. Because in the Western media, they were acting like this coup was going to succeed.
Right.
So people were saying, no, everyone share Soraya's live stream because look, it's not going to succeed. People are out on the streets, they're defending their country. And it was truly, as you said, a night of power. And let's not forget, I mean, this was the first coup in Turkey streamed in real time. It was the first coup in Turkey that was thwarted by the people. And I think there was a joke people were joking about later is that if, you know, Mohamed Morsi in Egypt had FaceTime, would Egypt have fallen to the coup, to the Sisi? I mean, so I think there were so many dynamics at play there. We heard a airplane going overhead, and people started cheering because they thought it was Erdogan making his way to the airport coming back. Because there were a lot of rumors that he had left the country.
Yeah, that was from the West coming a lot.
Yeah, and we thought
he'd gone to Germany.
Yeah, at the beginning of the night, we thought that it wasn't going to be successful. It was going to be successful because we thought he'd left the country.
One of the other challenge is when we, by say within 3 or 4 hours, we'd actually come to understand what was happening, and we knew that it's not going to be a success. People that were out on the streets was the other challenge for me at least was that people sending me these messages from across the globe and asking me all the wrong questions in a sense that they had been given to understand that a coup had already been a success and the government had left the country or was missing, military was in charge, people were on the streets against the government. Questions like that, oh my God, what are you going to do? You should come back. When is the next, have you reported it to your embassy? Because they were consuming a certain set of media and a certain set of messages and information which was completely not true. Although certain might have wanted that to be true, but it wasn't. So that was another challenge to make people understand, look, this is what has happened. People are out on the streets, and they are in charge of the country.
But we didn't know it was successful. I mean, we knew that they were out on the streets, but I couldn't go out. I was on my own, and it would have been really irresponsible for me to go alone. So I stayed at home. But I was on Twitter and reporting there from what I'd seen and that kind of thing. But you know, it wasn't until the next morning, and my bin men arrived at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I mean the tank fire on the bridge had barely just stopped, and because I could hear that very clearly,
right?
and the garbage
all the
men.
services,
and they arrived to collect the garbage
the
at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I'd been awake all night, and I was just stunned, and that's when I knew that it really has been successful.
There's something regarding that though. The United States made an announcement while the coup was still ongoing and basically, you know, didn't stand with the government, didn't stand with the Turkish people, and they were very generic with their response and their inclination towards the coup, and you know that's where actually they lost the trust of the Turkish people.
Well, they said we'll work with. Was it? They said they would work with any government in Turkey or something, as if they weren't. They didn't condemn it.
Exactly.
That's
the issue.
The whole event really served to highlight again the false narrative in this country and how there's such a lack of understanding as to what the dynamics really are here. I remember a Turkish friend saying to me that what the West never really understood is that, yes, the Turkish public is polarized over the political leadership in this country, as it is in almost every country in the news right now, including the United States. Yes, it is polarized over the current political leadership, but they refuse to really understand how unified the Turkish public is
First of all, just against military coups in general, and also against a movement that the Western press did not want to pay attention to because it was too complicated and complex to deliver to their audiences. And if you didn't understand the movement and the implications of the Gulen movement in Turkey, you will not understand anything that's happening in this context.
Definitely.
And they didn't. And I heard a lot of journalists say later that they really regretted, journalists that had been based in Turkey, they really regretted not pushing and insisting that they do stories on this movement. But it is, it's a shady, I always said it's a mix of Freemasons, Scientologists, and organized crime. You can't really prove exactly what they're doing, which makes it difficult for journalists to report on. But having said that, still nothing was really done to help the Western audiences that ended up looking like they were against Turkey really understand what was happening.
I think that's so well put, because I think it's so indicative that there were rumors that people who were against the government were out on the streets because they didn't want to believe that it wasn't just government supporters on the streets.
Exactly.
I mean, even in my neighborhood, I spoke to people who weren't supporters per se of the ruling party. They were from all kinds of political stripes, and they're like, but we still believe in our country's democracy, and we're not going to take this lying down. We're not going to allow military dictatorship to come to our country.
You know,
And the lack of not wanting, the lack of not wanting to understand that by the Western press, as you're saying, that just shows how much in a bubble, you know, people can be sometimes.
I'm Turkish Canadian.
You know?
I was surprised. I was genuinely shocked that the fact that there were not just AK Party supporters trying to overturn the coup. I was genuinely shocked.
Not just not AK Party supporters, but there were people who genuinely rally against AK Party leadership. We're still out on the streets fighting against this coup.
Just before we wrap up, how have you changed as a person and as a journalist a year later? What's been your personal and professional journey? Where are you now? How's it changed you?
Personally, it's taken me. It's giving me an exposure to understand things firsthand. I think that's where the key lies. I mean, do not look at or have a worldview unless you have seen things. There's a certain discourse that everybody consumes in media. Do not always believe that. There is always an alternative view to the things, and most of the times, that's what you should know. That's what I've learned.
Andrea, what about you?
That's a tough one. Except that, I just think that because so much of the media and the narrative around the world is determined by sometimes people and journalists who have a different understanding of things, that I just look at everything with a critical eye, and that I know that there's nothing out there that can't be questioned, if that makes sense.
Yes, of course.
And I know that, I still know. I mean, I think about right now how people are going to receive this conversation if they weren't in Turkey, or even if they were in Turkey at this time, thinking like, oh, you guys don't really understand, you know, who knows? Who knows?
Or maybe, sorry to interrupt you, say, oh, I know why you are saying there, because you're living there.
Because you're living there. This is your employer. You have to say this.
But it's not. That's not what this is about. No, we don't.
And when none of us are in denial that there are not issues in this country that concern us, of course there are. Of course there are. We're not fools. But there are issues like this all over the world. Of course. All over the world. And we deal with this as humans. Universally, and Turkey is also one of those countries that is, it's complicated. It's politically very complicated. Like you said, you won't understand it unless you live here. And even when you do live here, you still, you know you don't know everything.
Yeah.
You know you don't know everything.
Absolutely.
So I think if anything, it's just heightened more critical thinking.
Saraya, what about you?
I would say the night of the coup attempt highlighted for me the complexities of the society. I knew it was complex, I knew it was complicated, but it just showed me it's even more complex than I thought, you know? And I think that there's a reason why people were surprised at the coup being thwarted. If you were following certain narratives, certain frameworks, you know, and framings of certain developments, you would think it wouldn't succeed, right?
Exactly.
But yeah, I would say that just approaching particularly stories within Turkey with a more critical eye and realizing that we don't have to have an answer for everything.
Yeah.
I like that.
And knowing when to say, I don't know.
I love that.
But let's ask. Let's talk to people. Let's see why, for instance, more than half the country voted to change the Constitution. You know, whether or not you like it, I think if anything 2016 taught us, with Brexit, with the Trump win, it's that you need to get out of your own preconceived notions about people, get out of your bubble, and try to understand the other side.
I love it.
So I think it's definitely made me a better journalist. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, it was my first year of being a professional journalist, and this enormous piece of history happened that I witnessed firsthand. So I think it's probably had a huge effect. It was the first really big story that I was there for, that I was involved in. And it made me realize that I do kind of, you know, that I do really enjoy doing this, and that observing things like that, that is kind of really important to me. So I suppose it kind of cemented that as well.
Well, that's not a bad thing.
No, it's a really good thing.
Yes, and what about you?
Difficult question. Just like Arabella said, this was also my first year in professional journalism, and the coup attempt was the biggest thing I found myself in. So that basically defined, up until now, the rest of my career, and hopefully whatever is left to come, is access, information, and fearlessness. At the end of the day, I think what it's done to shape me is I'm not afraid to get to the truth.
That's very good. It's quite revealing.
Appreciated.
So on that note, that's all the time we have. I want to thank you all for taking the time to come to the table, and I wish you continued success. Till next time, from me and the team, thank you for joining us.